Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a controversial and often misunderstood topic, selling human organs. Is it legal? Why do most countries ban it? And what are the ethical implications?
This isn't just some abstract dilemma, folks. The organ trade is a global issue with very real consequences playing out across the world. We're talking about stories of desperation, where poverty pushes individuals to make unthinkable choices. We're talking about organized crime syndicates profiting off the sick and the poor. And we're talking about a system that often fails to protect the most vulnerable among us. We'll examine the motivations of both sellers and buyers, the legal frameworks that vary from country to country, and the ethical arguments for and against organ sales. By understanding the complexities, we can start to formulate informed opinions and engage in meaningful conversations about potential solutions. This is a conversation that requires empathy, critical thinking, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. It's about more than just laws and regulations. It's about human dignity, social justice, and the value we place on human life itself. So let's dive in and shed some light on this dark corner of the world. Stay with us. Let's be real for a second. The human body is a remarkable thing, but it's also incredibly fragile. We take our health for granted until it's threatened, until a vital organ starts to fail, and suddenly, our very existence hinges on finding a replacement. For thousands of people worldwide, that replacement doesn't come soon enough. They languish on organ transplant waiting lists, their hopes dwindling with each passing day. Imagine living with that kind of uncertainty. The constant fear, the ticking clock, the knowledge that your life is literally hanging in the balance. Now imagine being told that there is a way to jump the line, to get that life-saving organ, but it comes at a steep price, selling a part of yourself. For some, this prospect isn't just tempting, it's the only glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak reality. This is the heartbreaking reality faced by many potential organ sellers. They're often people backed into a corner, driven to desperate measures by circumstances beyond their control. And let's not forget, the decision to sell an organ is rarely made in isolation. It affects families, communities, and entire societies grappling with poverty, inequality, and limited access to healthcare. The organ trade thrives in parts of the world ravaged by poverty. Selling an organ can seem like a way out of despair, but it often comes with a hefty price tag. Organ brokers exploit the vulnerable. They offer a fraction of the organ's worth. The act of escape can trap individuals in exploitation. These are the human costs of a system preying on the poor. Beyond financial despair, other motivations come into play. Poverty is a major driver of organ sales, but not the only one. Motivations are complex and multifaceted. Some feel obligated to help loved ones, risking their own health. Family pressure and cultural norms also play a role. For example, a young man in Pakistan sells a kidney for his sister's dowry. In his community, providing a dowry is a matter of honor. He feels compelled to make this sacrifice. This highlights the influence of cultural factors and difficult choices. Not all organ sales are driven by desperation. Some believe they are making an altruistic gesture. They see it as saving a life and receiving compensation. Ethical concerns remain, especially around consent and exploitation. So, we've established that the organ trade is a murky world driven by a complex web of factors. But where do the law and international community stand on all of this? Well, it's complicated. There's no single, universally accepted answer. Instead, we have a patchwork of laws and regulations that vary wildly from country to country. In most developed nations, including the United States, Canada, and much of Europe, the sale of organs is strictly prohibited. These countries operate under what's known as an altruistic donation model. Organ donation is viewed as a selfless act, something you do out of the goodness of your heart, not for financial gain. This model emphasizes ethical considerations and aims to prevent the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. However, even within these countries, the lines can get blurry. While selling a kidney for cash is illegal, what about compensating donors for lost wages or medical expenses? These questions fuel ongoing debates about the ethics of incentivizing donation and whether a purely altruistic model is truly sustainable in the face of growing demand. The arguments against legalizing organ sales are rooted in concerns about social justice and the potential for exploitation. Critics argue that allowing organs to be bought and sold would inevitably create a two-tiered system, where the wealthy could easily purchase life-saving transplants while the poor are left behind, their bodies commodified as a source of income. Imagine a world where a kidney becomes just another luxury item, something you can add to your shopping cart along with that new sports car. Proponents of prohibition fear that such a system would disproportionately impact marginalized communities, exacerbating existing inequalities, and turning the human body into a tradable commodity. Furthermore, there are concerns about the potential for coercion and abuse. In countries with lax regulations or high levels of corruption, legalizing organ sales could empower criminal networks and create a breeding ground for forced organ harvesting. Safeguards and regulations, while well-intentioned, are often difficult to enforce, leaving vulnerable individuals at risk. Section 3. The Iranian Model, a controversial exception. While most of the world shuns the idea of organ sales, there is one notable exception: Iran. Since the late 1980s, Iran has had a legal, government-regulated system for kidney transplants. Under this model, individuals in need of a kidney can register with a central organization. Potential donors, after undergoing medical and psychological evaluations, can then choose to donate their kidney to a recipient in exchange for financial compensation. The Iranian model has been both praised and criticized. Supporters argue that it has significantly reduced waiting times for kidney transplants and virtually eliminated the black market for organs within the country. They point to the regulated nature of the system, with safeguards in place to protect both donors and recipients. However, critics argue that the Iranian model is not without its flaws. They raise concerns about the potential for coercion, particularly among economically disadvantaged individuals who may feel pressured to sell a kidney out of financial desperation. Furthermore, there are questions about the long-term health outcomes of donors and whether the financial compensation adequately accounts for the potential risks involved. Section 1. The Exploitation Argument, a slippery slope to inequality. The prospect of lifting yourself out of poverty can be a powerful motivator. But what happens when that motivation intersects with a global demand for organs? This is where the ethical ground starts to crumble. The bodies of the poor risk becoming commodities in a ruthless market. Legalizing organ sales could lead to exploitation of the vulnerable. Imagine a world where desperation becomes a bargaining chip. Those living on the margins could be pressured into selling their organs. This isn't dystopian, it's a real concern in a world with economic disparity. Legalizing organ sales could push exploitation further underground. Criminal networks would prey on the desperate, driving a wedge between the haves and the have-nots. Access to healthcare would hinge on wealth, turning health into a privilege for the wealthy. Section 2. The Medical Minefield. Unregulated surgeries and long-term risks. The human body isn't a machine where you can simply swap out parts without consequence. Organ transplantation requires meticulous medical expertise, rigorous screening, and comprehensive aftercare. Yet, in the shadows of the illegal organ trade, this is precisely what's happening. Unregulated surgeries are performed in makeshift clinics, often lacking basic sanitation. It's a recipe for disaster, putting both the donor and the recipient at risk. Without proper care, the surgery can result in infection, complications, or even death. And even if the procedure goes smoothly, there's the long-term impact on their health. Section 3. A question of fairness when life-saving treatments become commodities. The debate over organ sales isn't just about legality or medical risk, it strikes at the heart of societal values. Is it ethical to put a price tag on human organs, treating them as commodities? What message does that send about the sanctity of human life? These questions have plagued ethicists, policymakers, and medical professionals for decades. Opponents argue it undermines equity and fairness in society. Imagine a world where access to life-saving treatment depends on financial resources. The wealthy could buy their way to the front of the transplant list. This creates a two-tiered healthcare system, measuring life in dollars. It erodes the notion of healthcare as a fundamental human right. The gap between rich and poor widens, affecting access to life itself. Stories from the shadows. Behind the facts lie real stories, real people whose lives have been altered by this shadowy industry. Take Rajesh, from an impoverished village in India. Desperate, he agreed to sell a kidney. The surgery was excruciating and unsanitary. Instead of escaping poverty, Rajesh found himself trapped in pain and debt. His story echoes countless others, victims of the organ trade. Section 2. The human cost of a lucrative trade, from coercion to kidnapping. The organ trade, fueled by desperation and driven by profit, blurs the lines between consent and coercion. Some sell organs out of desperation while others are coerced, tricked, or kidnapped. Victims, often from marginalized communities, are exploited for profit. Their suffering is silenced by fear and intimidation. Beyond the headlines. The ripple effects of exploitation. The illegal organ trade sends shockwaves through communities, eroding trust and fueling corruption. It perpetuates cycles of poverty and inequality, devaluing human life. Families are torn apart, and communities live in fear and suspicion. The organ trade often goes hand in hand with other organized crimes. The black market's grip, a global web of illegality. We've seen the devastating impact of the organ trade on individuals and communities, but the story doesn't end there. This illicit industry, fueled by desperation and driven by profit, operates on a global scale, weaving a complex web of illegal activities that often span continents. This is not just a localized problem, it's a transnational crime that demands a coordinated, international response. The black market for organs thrives in the shadows, exploiting legal loopholes, corrupt officials, and weak law enforcement. Organ brokers, acting as intermediaries between desperate donors and wealthy recipients, facilitate these illicit transactions, often using sophisticated methods to evade detection. They operate across borders, connecting buyers in developed countries with sellers in impoverished regions, where poverty and lack of opportunity create a fertile ground for exploitation. These networks are often linked to other forms of organized crime, blurring the lines between organ trafficking, human trafficking, drug smuggling, and money laundering. The vast sums of money involved create a powerful incentive for criminal enterprises, attracting ruthless individuals willing to exploit the vulnerable for profit. The black market for organs, with its global reach and complex network of actors, poses a significant challenge to law enforcement agencies worldwide. High stakes, higher risks, the consequences of black market participation. The allure of a quick fix, whether it's a desperate patient seeking a life-saving transplant or a greedy individual looking to profit from someone else's misfortune, can cloud judgment and lead people down dangerous paths. The black market for organs operates outside the law, and those who choose to participate, whether knowingly or unknowingly, face severe consequences. For donors, the risks are enormous. Operating outside the purview of regulated medical facilities, black market surgeries are often performed in unsanitary conditions, by unqualified individuals with little regard for the donor's health and well-being. Complications, infections, and even death are not uncommon outcomes, and even if the surgery itself is successful, donors are often left with long-term health problems, their bodies scarred and their lives forever altered by the experience. Recipients, too, face significant risks. Without proper screening and medical oversight, there's no guarantee that the organ they're receiving is healthy or compatible. Transmitted diseases, organ rejection, and other complications are constant threats, turning a desperate attempt to prolong life into a potentially deadly gamble. And let's not forget the ethical implications of knowingly participating in an industry that thrives on exploitation and human suffering. Breaking the cycle. Disrupting demand and empowering potential victims. Tackling the black market for organs requires a multi-pronged approach, one that addresses both the supply and demand sides of this complex equation. Law enforcement agencies need the resources and international cooperation to effectively target criminal networks, dismantle their operations, and bring perpetrators to justice. But enforcement alone is not enough. We need to address the root causes that drive individuals to become both donors and recipients in the black market. This means tackling poverty, improving access to healthcare, and creating economic opportunities in marginalized communities. Empowering potential victims, providing them with viable alternatives, is crucial in curbing the supply of organs. On the demand side, raising awareness about the ethical implications and health risks associated with black market transplants is essential. Public education campaigns, targeted outreach to patient communities, and stricter penalties for those who knowingly participate in this illicit trade can help reduce demand and discourage individuals from resorting to desperate measures. The fight against the black market for organs is a fight for human dignity, for the value we place on human life itself. It's a fight that requires a collective effort, one that transcends borders and unites us in our shared humanity. A shared responsibility towards a more ethical future. We've journeyed through the dark underbelly of the organ trade, exposing the desperation, the exploitation, and the complex web of factors that fuel this illicit industry. We've seen the devastating impact on individuals, families, and entire communities. But amidst the bleakness, there's a glimmer of hope, a recognition that we, as a global community, have a shared responsibility to create a more just and humane system. By acknowledging the complexities, engaging in open dialogue, and working together, we can dismantle the systems that allow the organ trade to thrive and pave the way for a future where access to life-saving treatments is based on need. So, how do we solve this crisis? Some experts suggest improving organ donation systems, raising awareness about voluntary donation, and even considering ethical compensation models. The goal is to save lives while preventing exploitation. Countries could implement better incentives for living donors, such as covering medical costs, lost wages, or providing health insurance. Some also advocate for an opt-out system, where everyone is automatically an organ donor unless they choose otherwise. What do you think? Should selling organs be legal under strict regulations, or is it too risky? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. See you next time.